There is one sentence buried in British law that quietly changed Princess Charlotte's entire future before she was even born, and most people watching the royal family today still have no idea it exists. It is the reason Charlotte holds a position no British princess in 1,000 years has ever held. And according to a growing number of royal commentators, it may only be the beginning of the role Prince William is believed to be preparing for his daughter. Because behind the palace walls, the question experts keep circling back to is not whether Charlotte will matter to the future of the monarchy. It is how much of that future may quietly rest on her shoulders. Before we go any further, make sure you're subscribed. Start with the law itself because it is real, it is historic, and almost nobody talks about it. In 2013, Parliament passed the Succession to the Crown Act, ending more than 3 centuries of male preference primogeniture. Under the old rules, a younger brother would automatically leap over his older sister in the line of succession, no matter when she was born, no matter what she offered. It happened to Princess Anne, who watched Andrew and Edward pass her by simply because they were boys. It happened in various forms to royal daughters going back centuries, but the 2013 Act ended that forever. So when Prince Louis was born in 2018, something happened that had never happened before in British history. Charlotte kept her place. She remained second in line to the throne, directly behind George, and no brother, no matter how many, could ever have displaced her. That single legal change made her the first princess in the history of the British monarchy whose position is protected by law rather than dependent on the absence of brothers. Most coverage mentioned it once on the day Louis was born and then moved on, but royal watchers argue that the law is only the foundation. What William is believed to be building on top of it is far more interesting. To understand why, you have to understand the pattern the Windsors have been trying to escape for 3 generations, a pattern with a name so painful that Prince Harry used it as the title of his memoir, The Spare. Princess Margaret lived it first. She was, by almost every account, the more magnetic of the 2 sisters, witty, glamorous, and natural performer. But the institution had built a role for only one of them. Elizabeth had a destiny. Margaret had proximity to one. Biographers have spent decades chronicling what that did to her, the blocked marriage to Peter Townsend, the restlessness, the sense of a life spent orbiting a throne she could see but never touch. Prince Andrew lived the pattern next. Born second, once as high as second in line, he watched his relevance erode with every royal birth that followed. Royal historians have long argued that the absence of a defined, meaningful role contributed to the drift and the choices that eventually consumed his reputation entirely. And then came Harry, the first spare to describe the experience from the inside in his own voice in a memoir that became one of the fastest-selling non-fiction books in history. He wrote about growing up as the backup, the alternative, the insurance policy. 3 generations, 3 versions of the same wound, each one ending in a different kind of damage. Royal commentators have repeatedly suggested that no one alive understands this pattern more intimately than William, because he didn't read about the 3rd version in a book. He lived across the hallway from it, and experts believe that is exactly why the way he and Catherine are raising Charlotte looks so deliberately, so consciously different. But before we get to what they're reportedly doing differently, there is one member of the family who proves the pattern can be broken, and she may be the single most important clue to Charlotte's future, Princess Anne. Year after year, when the annual engagement numbers are tallied, Anne sits at or near the top of the list of the hardest working members of the royal family, routinely carrying out more official duties than royals decades younger, often more than 500 engagements in a single year. She was the spare of her generation. She was displaced in the succession by 2 younger brothers under the old rules, pushed from second in line down and down again as the family grew. By every historical precedent, she should have become another Margaret. Instead, she built something no royal daughter before her had built, a life of relentless, unglamorous service. Hundreds of patronages, decades of overseas tours, the Save the Children presidency she has held since 1970. A reputation among commentators and palace insiders alike as the most quietly indispensable person in the entire institution. She never competed with Charles. She never faded into irrelevance. Royal biographers have often described Anne as the living proof of what a royal sibling can become when they are given purpose instead of mere position. And here is where the speculation becomes genuinely fascinating, because Anne holds a title that many experts believe is destined one day for Charlotte. The title is Princess Royal. It is the highest honor a British sovereign can bestow on his eldest daughter, and it is held for life. There have been only 7 in history. Anne received it from Queen Elizabeth in 1987, and as long as Anne lives, it cannot be granted to anyone else. That is simply how the title works. But royal commentators have speculated for years about what happens in the next reign. When the title eventually becomes available during the reign of a future king, Charlotte would be the natural recipient, the eldest daughter of a sovereign, stepping into the role held by one of the most respected royals of the modern era. Nothing has been announced, Nothing has been confirmed. The palace has never spoken about it, and by tradition, never would this far in advance. But the logic is difficult to ignore, and the comparison between Anne and Charlotte has become one of the most persistent themes in royal commentary, because the qualities the public came to admire in Anne, the steadiness, the composure, the complete lack of interest in celebrity, are the same qualities observers claim to keep glimpsing in Charlotte, and some of those glimpses have been impossible to miss. Think back to September 2022 and the funeral of Queen Elizabeth II. Charlotte was 7 years old, walking through one of the most heavily broadcast events in television history, watched by billions of people around the world. Pinned to her coat was a small diamond horseshoe brooch, a gift, it was widely reported, from the Queen herself, a quiet tribute to her great-grandmother's lifelong love of horses. A 7-year-old carrying a private message of remembrance in plain sight, and then came the moment that travelled around the world. As the Queen's coffin passed, cameras appeared to catch Charlotte turning to her older brother with a quiet reminder about when to bow. Lip readers and commentators pored over the clip for days. A child, in the middle of unimaginable solemnity, gently steadying the future king. Whether it was an ordinary sibling moment or something more instinctive, it fit perfectly into the story royal observers had already been telling for years, that within the Wales family, Charlotte is the composed one, the watchful one, the child who seems to carry public occasions with unusual ease. The pattern shows up again and again in the footage. At the Platinum Jubilee, viewers watched her manage her younger brother Louis on the balcony while the world laughed at his antics. At the coronation, at Trooping the Colour, at Wimbledon beside her mother, the commentary has been remarkably consistent. This is a child unusually at home in the most watched family on earth. And every time it happens, the same question resurfaces. Is the family simply lucky, or is something being cultivated? The answer, according to those who study William and Catherine closely, lies in a parenting philosophy the couple has never hidden. In 2022, they moved their children out of central London, away from the vast apartments of Kensington Palace, to Adelaide Cottage in Windsor, a deliberately modest 4-bedroom home with no live-in staff. They enrolled George, Charlotte and Louis together at Lambrook, a country school where, by all accounts, the children queue for lunch like everyone else. Catherine has made early childhood the defining cause of her public life, speaking again and again about emotional security, about the foundations laid in a child's first years, about giving children the space to become themselves before the world tells them who to be. William has spoken openly in interviews, in documentaries, about his determination to give his children as normal a childhood as the institution allows before duty arrives. None of this is rumour. It is the documented, visible shape of how the Waleses are raising the next royal generation, and royal experts believe the strategy has a very specific purpose where Charlotte is concerned, to make sure that when her public role eventually comes, it arrives as a choice she has been prepared for, not a cage she wakes up inside. It is, commentators argue, the exact inverse of what happened to Margaret, who was given glamour but no purpose, the inverse of Andrew, who was given rank but no direction, the inverse of Harry, who is described being given a label before he was ever given a say. But there is one more factor that makes Charlotte's future role more significant than any royal daughters before her, and it has nothing to do with parenting. It has to do with arithmetic. King Charles has long favoured a slimmed-down monarchy, fewer working royals, a leaner institution, but events have slimmed it far beyond anything he intended. Harry and Meghan stepped away in 2020 and built a life in California. Andrew was stripped of his public role entirely. The working core of the family has contracted to a handful of senior figures, and several of them, Anne, Edward, Sophie, are already in or approaching their 60s and 70s. Now fast forward to the reign of King George VII whenever it comes. Run the numbers and the picture becomes stark. The pool of working royals available to support him will be smaller than at any point in modern royal history. The state visits, the investitures, the hundreds of patronages, the quiet institutional weight that Anne has carried for more than 50 years, someone will have to carry it. Royal commentators have pointed out the obvious conclusion. In that future monarchy, Charlotte will not be a spare in any meaningful sense of the word. She will be essential. Not because a title demands it, because there will simply be no one else. Which raises the final question, the one the palace will never answer, but the commentary world cannot stop asking. What does George's reign look like if his sister stands beside him, and what does it look like if she doesn't? The optimists point to Anne and Charles, siblings who found a working rhythm that has lasted half a century without a single public rupture, the heir and the workhorse, each secure in a role the other never wanted. The pessimists point to every generation before and after them, to Margaret's loneliness, to Andrew's fall, to the brothers whose estrangement has played out in books, interviews and documentaries for the entire world to see. And somewhere in Windsor, 2 children are growing up under parents who have watched both versions of that story unfold inside their own family at devastating personal cost. Nothing about Charlotte's future role has been announced, and it may be a decade or more before anything ever is, But the direction of travel is hard to miss. The law that locked her place in history before her brother was even born, the parenting built around preparation without pressure, the shrinking institution that will one day need every capable pair of hands it has, and the living example of the Princess Royal whose path she may one day follow. Put it all together and a quiet picture emerges. The monarchy's future is usually told as one boy's story. Look a little closer and it has already become a story about two children and about a father who watched what the old pattern did to his brother and appears determined that this time the second child will not become the family's next wound, but its greatest strength. If you found this look at Charlotte's future fascinating, you'll want to see our breakdown of how Princess Anne became the most quietly powerful royal of her generation, the blueprint Charlotte may one day follow. That video is on your screen now. This is Royal Pulse, where whispers around the crown come to light.